Well, welcome back. From teaching the teacher to a key question, but just what is learning? And isn't learning something that goes on all the time, not just in the classroom? Well, some parents think that's the case and have opted for homeschooling. Though the children involved number in the 500,000 range from amongst some 46.2 million school children enrolled in U.S. public schools, homeschooling is a route being taken by more families. So what's involved? Well, my next guest has some, if not all, of the answers. Here's Patrick Farenga, president of Holt Associates, a company that publishes curricular materials for homeschooling. He's also publisher of Growing Without Schooling. And Pat, welcome to Monitor Forum.
Thank you, John.
Why are parents opting for homeschooling? It's been quite a surge in the last year or so, or last 3 years, perhaps.
Yes, well, it's been growing quite a lot. Since we started publishing in 1977, they estimated about 15,000 families were doing it, and now it's up to, as you noted, 500,000. Probably three reasons. One, parents feel that raising their children is their business and not the government's. Secondly, that they enjoy being with their children and watching them learn, and they don't want to give that pleasure up to others. And third, they don't want to see their children hurt physically, spiritually, or mentally in public schools.
What are they saying? We'll come back to the other points, though. What are they actually saying about the education system?
That it's not very efficient, and it's not geared towards the children. It's geared more towards the bureaucracy, towards meeting the needs of the curriculum and marching all the children through it at the same pace without any attention to individual needs. Lip service, certainly, but not necessarily attention.
So are they saying that the education system is more interested in being educators rather than actually teaching?
Well, I think there's a big distinction that is being made between schooling and education. Our schools school very well. They teach children that when the bell rings, you stop studying math and you move on to science, and you have your next 45-minute segment. And that flies in the face of everything that we know about how children learn before they go to school, and certainly how adults learn after they finish their school.
But then, where and how does the child respond to being taken out of school?
Well, it can sometimes be a difficult process. The longer children have been in school, the longer it takes for them to trust the parents and their situation and themselves, most importantly themselves, that they can indeed learn at home and, more importantly, in their community with other people.
What about the teacher-pupil relationship, though? Isn't there an importance in that, or does the parent take on that responsibility? And how does the child respond to that shift in the parenting responsibility, or is that our view of it?
I think it's more our view of it. Some parents will put on the mask of teacher, just as some teachers do, and they assume a role. Indeed, some teachers are advised in schools of education to assume the role of professional educator and so on. And this could be quite frightening to a 6-, 7-, or 8-year-old who's saying this, is this a real person? And long-time homeschoolers eventually drop the mask and don't distinguish between teaching and parenting. They just be themselves, and they answer their children's questions as they arise, and as anyone who has children knows, they arise with quite a lot of frequency.
Well, let me just be a bit of a devil's advocate. What if the parent isn't equipped enough to do the teaching? What if they haven't been too successful in their own education?
Well, there's all sorts of different ways that we learn, and the lecture model, the model of pure instruction from the teacher to the pupil, is just one of them. If a parent doesn't have knowledge in a specific area, let's take say someone who's is homeschooling a teenager, and the child wants to know something about physics, and you've got limited knowledge of that or no knowledge at all. Perhaps you only graduated high school and you never even touched the subject. There's all sorts of opportunities outside that you can plug into. First of all, if you have a cooperative school district and they allow you to take those courses, as some do, here in Massachusetts, Barnstable is one of them, that is one route that you can take. You can actually use a school as a resource, much like you would use a museum. And indeed, a museum and a library would be the next place.
But not all schools are that friendly, are they?
Very few of them are, unfortunately.
Well, then, how do I get my child, if I'm teaching in the home, accredited, as it were, passed all the various exams and so forth in order to head towards college?
Well, that's an interesting question, because the traditional route is to take the GED, which is the equivalency exam for a high school diploma. Some homeschoolers don't do that. Some colleges require some sort of transcript, And if your child is enrolled in a satellite school or a correspondence program, they'll provide the transcripts and indeed a diploma. But some parents, and growing numbers of them, don't even want that. They are trying to say that the piece of paper is just a piece of paper. It's not the end, the most important thing. And so they present a portfolio of the child's work, and they rely on interviews, and if they require standardized tests like the SAT, they take them. Many homeschoolers, there aren't a whole lot out there who've done it, but homeschoolers have gotten into places such as Harvard and Rice University without having any transcripts or high school diplomas.
Well, what has caused that? What happened? Was it the interview that,
yes, it was,
in which the pupils, I presume, stood out?
Yes, you do have to take that extra step and make a case for yourself. I mean, many children, many young adults who get accepted into college don't even need the interview. They just go solely by your grades and your SAT scores. Homeschoolers have to take that extra step, meet the interviewer, go over what they've done. And homeschoolers on the whole have done a lot more than most high school children because they've had access to the real world and have done things such as run their own businesses, volunteered or apprenticed before they get into college.
Pat, what's really going on here? And I don't mean it in a critical way, I'm in a curious way. What are the homeschoolers really saying? Is it going back to some of what they would say, the essentials, the American way, the ability or the freedom to do what you wish?
Certainly, that's one aspect of it. Many homeschoolers sort of view it as a back to the future sort of movement. Like we've gone so far with public education and mass education, and it's failed. In fact, the prescription that we keep hearing is more of the medicine that's making the children ill. And so it's sort of a reaction. Say, well, what did we have before public education? What produced the Edisons? Or, well, not so much Edison, the Franklins, the Lincolns, the Washingtons, you know, the Eli Whitneys. What's going on here? And they are taking a step back and saying, you know, let's do this. And it's also a call for more time for the family. The family time is under a barrage from school. Not only do you have school, but then you have school work and extracurricular activities, and certainly it's under barrage from the economic standpoint, where more and more two-income families have to occur in order to just simply pay the rent. And some people are just saying enough. You know, they are, you know, just like in the 70s, some people left their jobs in the inner city to go out and live in rural areas, and you know, this is sort of happening with homeschooling. Who are homeschooling, and some of them would do it for religious reasons, citing the secular humanism that they find in schools and saying that their children's beliefs are challenged and they're too young to withstand these challenges, and they become peer dependent and not respectful of their elders and so on. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect that I meant when I said spiritual is literally children's spirits. I mean, we've all experienced that in school, where what we want to pursue, what we think is important, is considered trivial. And the only thing that's important in school is what the teacher deems important. And unfortunately for teachers, it's what really the Board of Regents has told the teachers to deem important.
We also need to talk a bit about what we mean by learning. Teaching is one thing, learning is another. How do you define learning?
Learning is something that, as you noted, goes on all the time. To me, it is a distinctly human endeavor. It is something that we don't stop doing. Unfortunately, school has created the situation where we view learning as a commodity to be bought and sold, and you get better learning if you pay a higher price and attend a prestigious school. And the only learning that seems to count, you know, in this scenario is the learning that takes place in a special building called school, administered by people who specialize in nothing else. Everything else that we learn is therefore trivial by, you know, just by the fact that it's not included in the curriculum, or that we just start to doubt ourselves.
Do you find that homeschoolers are more prepared for life than some who go through the traditional means? Because I've had many a guest say that the education system doesn't teach children how to live or how to face life. They come out ill-equipped in that department. Do you find the opposite occurs with homeschooling?
Well, that's one of the desired effects of homeschooling, and certainly a major reason for a lot of parents. Some parents don't send their children to school at all, and they notice that their children don't have a lot of the self-esteem and self-concept problems that children who do attend school have. For the vast majority of parents whose children are in school, they have a tough time, then they take them out to homeschool. they see that one of the reasons I pull them out is because they say, gosh, this child that was always asking why, this child that couldn't stop playing with, taking apart toys and taking apart, gosh, we had to keep them away from the tape recorders, I want to rip them apart. All of a sudden comes home and it's got stomach aches, has headaches, has very little interest in things outside, sorts of becomes withdrawn. Unfortunately, schools now have a term for that. It's called school phobia.
What's another word for that? Stress. I'm interested because if one is a parent and faced with this issue, what steps should one take if one really is facing up to the issue of home education?
If it's something that you want to do and that you feel is the best thing for your child at this time, and I want to emphasize that homeschooling is an option. It does not mean it's an irrevocable decision that once you take your child out of school, that they will never ever set foot in it again. Many homeschoolers view their home as having a swinging door between the home and school. And so they may take their child out for 6 months, a year, 2 years, and then they go back because they feel the child is matured or has got a good firm base or is simply ready to handle it. Others, sometimes the children say they don't want to go back. They're doing more interesting things. They have better things to do than go to school. And so they're able to grow that way. But if you're going to homeschool, probably the thing you have to do is realize that it's going to change your life as much as it's going to change your child's.
I was going to say that you're asking for an even greater commitment in a lifestyle that's in a way diminishing that commitment, or at least trying to diminish that commitment by sheer pace of life. What does it mean to the typical family?
What does homeschooling mean? It means certainly more togetherness, which has its pros and cons naturally. But it also means working that out. Many people sort of forget that we are all homeschooling before our children become compulsory school age. And actually what happens is you just take that model of what your children were doing between 0 and 5 and now just keep going, keep doing it. You asked me what learning is, and I think one way to look upon education and learning is sort of a growth and expansion of the individual into the world. And this is one way that you can help them. Just as you've always done. It need not be any more complicated than that.
What about the costs?
Well, the costs can vary from very little. There's a friend of mine who's an author, wrote a book about homeschooling, wanted to call it Love in a Library Card. So that's all you need to homeschool. And that's probably pretty accurate. But some parents will spend as much money as a very expensive private school education and materials for their children and tutors and so on. So it's what you can afford.
But then what about the public school, which is dependent upon, and I know we're dealing with very small numbers here, but is dependent upon the enrollment figures to obtain funding?
Yes.
How do the schools react? Is that a cause for perhaps a more negative response to homeschooling?
Certainly. That has been and always is a big issue, particularly in these times of budget cuts and so on. So we are seeing some schools respond favorably. Some schools have always responded favorably. They've simply enrolled the home study students as independent study students. And they get their funds. They allow the homeschooling students to use the school as a resource center. And it works out quite nicely.
It seems to me that there's a key coming through here, because so many educators have talked about the challenging relationship between the teacher and the parent and trying to involve the parent more. Yet what you've just said seems to me provide a stepping stone for that parental involvement through that step of enrolling the students in that special way.
Certainly, and I wish that would be built upon. I think that there's a great amount of benefits to be had by both parties here if schools and homeschoolers cooperate. But then, there are all sorts of shades here. Recently, the Cupertino School District in California, in order to maintain its funding, offered homeschoolers a $1,000 tuition tax credit if they would register their children in their school. The reason being they get $3,000 for every student there, so they keep $2,000 and give the parents the tuition tax credit. However, what happens is you're sort of giving the autonomy of your program to them, because you have to administer that school district's program and go through the monthly evaluations. So then all you're doing is becoming an adjunct to the school rather than an alternative to the school.
Do you know what open-end mutual funds are?
The Wall Street Journal Guide to Understanding Money and Markets tells
a criticism come up, which, as someone who was born and raised in England, had to make me sort of puzzle a little bit, is that children who go through homeschooling are deprived of all of the, could we say, the social graces? Mm-hmm. How do you explain that? It seems to be a very weak argument, because I'd have thought the social graces would have started in the home.
Absolutely, and it's an argument that is slowly losing favor with educators, although I think what happened was, at first they attacked homeschooling on the grounds of academics, and then they realized that even though the parents may not know everything, they can put their children in touch with people who do materials that will help them, and that children just learn. And so as more and more homeschoolers got into college, or simply didn't go to college but got into the world of work without any problems, they started to realize, well, you know, there is a track record here. So what else? Is it socialization? So they make a big issue about that, but now even that is coming down, because we realize that one of the main reasons parents homeschool is because of the social life of the schools. They don't like the socialization that goes on there.
Because the socialization today in all too many schools includes the drug culture and the peer pressure and so forth. I suppose that's what they're saying we've had enough of.
That's right, and of course the schools will turn around and say, but that's what life is, you must have this, and it's sort of like saying, well, yes, skiing involves breaking your legs sometimes, so we must break our legs, you know, before you can learn how to ski. It really is a shame that we have such a poor view of humanity, that we feel that we must protect our children from society, and then at the same time say that they're being deprived of social experiences.
Is this just an American phenomenon, or do you have proof of schooling like this going on elsewhere?
Well, there's been schooling going on like this all over the world. Probably the countries we hear most from are Australia, Canada, and England. Education Otherwise is the name of the group in England that has homeschooling. But homeschooling has always taken place, even before you know, it became more organized in the late 70s. For instance, the Irish Constitution provides for homeschooling, and that was written in the 1920s. You know, they said that that would be considered the equivalent of attending public school.
I think probably we ought to just say again that the numbers we're talking about here in the United States are about 500,000.
Yes.
Yet, in what's being written, it seems to be seen as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Why, being a protagonist for it, why is it perceived as a threat?
Well, there's all sorts of reasons, and the one that strikes me as the common denominator through all of this is just sort of personal professional pride. That I've attended 4 years of graduate school or just undergraduate school. I got my BA in education. What makes you think that you can do as good a job as I can? And that is something that has come up time and time again. I don't think that educators need to view homeschooling as a threat, but they do. They sort of view it as a personal criticism, or as a threat to the very existence of their school. I mean, as you noted, I mean, the numbers are very small of homeschoolers, even though they're growing, but I think they'll always remain small. If it's a % of the whole population by the year 2000, I'd be most impressed. But somehow they view this, they're not looking at the whole picture and realizing that they're not calling for the abolition of school, it's calling for just sort of changing the rules of use.
Can you categorize the type of parent who's doing this? Is that an unfair question?
There is no way to categorize homeschool. They cover, you know, all extremes of the political and sociologically line. Gosh, I would hesitate to do that. Probably they just have a common interest in their children. Probably the common denominator.
And, well, I think probably that's the best point to end on, is that sense the common denominator is really a desire to see their child educated.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you very much for joining me on Monitor Forum.
Well, thank you, John.
Pat Farenga. And my thanks, too, to Dean of Boston University's Graduate School of Education, Peter Greer. And that's it for this week's edition. We'll be back at the same time next week. Until then, take care. Goodbye.